Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel and blog. So for today's video, this is actually part of day 2 of blog hops for Honeybee Stamps Brie Mine release. They had released this earlier last month. And then after the holidays and creativation and everything, we've all gotten together to do blog hops to kind of promote the release and show a bunch of inspiration using these sets, all that stuff. So I will have links, of course, in the description box below the video to my blog, and there'll be links to everyone and all that fun stuff. So for my cards, I used the new May the Mouse stamp set because it's adorable. And I stamped the mouse onto, this is Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I used my anti-static powder tool. I stamped the mouse image and this little jar of honey with VersaFine ONYX black ink, and then I used my detail clear embossing powder over it, which isn't a necessary step. I just like the looks of it. Plus, especially when using Bristol Smooth, it makes sure that I'm not going to smear it because I tend to do that. So clear heat emboss that, and then made sure to melt that with my heat tool until everything was smooth and melted. And then for my coloring, the coloring was really simple. I just used my Arteza water brush markers, and I just used a gray for the mouse, scribbling down the color first, and then I just pull it out with my detail water brush. So really simple, and that's also why I chose Bristol Smooth cardstock, was because I really like the results I get with whether it be these Arteza markers or my clean color real brush markers, anything like that. I find Bristol Smooth is one of the best options because the color really moves. I'm able to really pull it out with my water brush, or just a paintbrush dipped in water will work. And it gives you that wiggle room to move things around and not end up with like harsh lines. So I went along, I just used a gray for the body. I added, some little pink to his ears, black for his nose, and I used a couple different shades of yellow for the actual little jar of honey there. And then once everything's completely dry, because it has to be dry, otherwise the gel pen, it's just going to smear and not work. After everything was dry, I used my white gel pen just to add some highlights to, give it that little extra something, and add little highlights to his nose, and then I also the dots to his eyes because I'd gone over that with the marker so it wasn't white anymore. So I just used the gel pen to fix that little oopsie. And then again, made sure that was dry before using the coordinating wafer die set to die cut these images. So I'm just going to tape these into place with some washi tape and then run these through my die cut machine. And the mouse die cut also cuts around his little paws there, so you can have him holding there's like a million different little objects in the stamp set. So after die cutting him, I just inserted that little jar of honey, so now he's holding it. And I glued that into place with some craft tacky glue. And then for my card front, I have some just heavyweight white cardstock. I'm not using Bristol Smooth for this. You could, but it isn't necessary. And because I'm using oxide inks, I didn't really want to use Bristol Smooth. If you really want to get a great blend with dye inks, etc., Bristol Smooth is great because the ink kind of sits on top of it for longer. But for this, it wasn't necessary, so I just used regular heavyweight white cardstock. And I'm using one of the stencils from the HEXI Patterns Background Stencil Pack. It's a set of 4. I just wanted to use this one stencil. And I just taped it into place with some washi tape, and then I used 2 shades of Distress Oxide ink. I'm using Wild Honey and Squeezed Lemonade oxide inks. And my Life Changing Blender brushes. I just have 2 separate brushes. I could have just used one. But because I was going back and forth with 2 different colors, it was easier to use 2 brushes, so I didn't have to keep like wiping off the brush. I have my microfiber cloth kind of at the bottom of the screen there, so right in front of me, that I will use if I feel like I have too much ink on the brush for my liking. Plus it just enables me to go back and forth, just to kind of add darker areas and lighter areas because I liked the variation I was getting with that. So I just kind of went back and forth with those 2 colors and the 2 different brushes. And then once I was happy with that, I can just remove the stencil. My background was technically good to go, but I also decided to add a little bit of splatter. So I just got out my little splat box, something to protect my work surface, and then I'm using some Ranger Black Soot Distress Paint for my splatter. I've had a lot of people ask me what do I prefer to do black splatter. It's this. This makes the best black splatter. This paint is very liquidy, so you don't need to water it down or anything. It splatters. I just picked up a bit with a brush, put it on an acrylic block here, then flicked the edge of the brush against the acrylic block to create my splatter. Always, just FYI, if you're not aware, distress paint is permanent, so you want to clean your brush immediately. If you get it on your work surface, if it dries on anything, it's permanent. Which I didn't know for the longest time. So just make sure to like clean whatever you're using immediately, because once it kind of like seeps into anything or, you know, is left to dry, it's very difficult to remove. But it makes the best splatter, so I love it for that. And I made sure to let it dry completely. Like walked away, went and did some other things, you know, made supper, whatever. Made sure it was dry before handling it, because I usually tend to smear things. So I let that completely dry, and then I backed that with some yellow cardstock that I die cut with the largest of the SCALLOP A2 wafer dies. And then use that same cardstock, the scraps kind of left over, to stamp sentiments from the Brie Mine stamp set. It has a whole bunch of little sentiments that you can mix and match and build. So I stamped 2 of the sentiments onto that yellow cardstock with clear embossing ink, and then I'm just using some detail white embossing powder, pouring that over top, and then I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. And while I have everything out, I'm also going to grab some black cardstock and stamp more sentiments from that set to like build my actual phrases. So I'm going to white heat emboss those as well. Now the script sentiments in that set all have, there's a coordinating die set that will die cut all of these. So that's what I'm going to use to die cut the sentiments I stamped on the yellow cardstock. The ones on the black cardstock, I just trim these down with my paper trimmer just to get them into like narrower little strips before adhering them. But I'm just going to stamp everything again, clear embossing ink. I'd use my anti-static powder tool first, stamp the images with clear embossing ink, coated it with the detail white embossing powder, melt that with my heat tool. And then once all that process is done, I can get all that out of the way and start actually assembling my card. So I have my card front with the HEXI patterns and Distress Oxide and the black splatter. And then I've adhered my little May the Mouse with some foam adhesive, same with the honey sentiment. The other 2 parts of the sentiment, I'm going to just adhere flat to the card front with my craft tacky glue. So it'll say "You're sweet as honey." And then of course the mouse holding that cute little honey jar. So once I got those adhered into place, I decided on the inside of the card, like I was going to add the sentiments, but then I decided as well that it would look really cute to add a bit of more of that stenciling on the inside, because it would take 2 seconds. It doesn't take very long, and just finishes off, you know, kind of ties it all together. So I've got my card base, which is also heavyweight white cardstock, and I'm just going to hold the stencil in place with my fingers. I'd already cleaned it off from earlier, which I really like to do when I'm using oxides, because the ink just will sit on the stencil, and again, I'll smear it. So I like to wipe it off and keep it clean as soon as I'm done using it. So it's clean again. I've just lined it up, held it with my fingers against the inside of the card, and then I do the exact same thing, kind of go back and forth with those brushes and those same 2 Distress Oxide inks. I only did the bottom corner on the inside of the card. There was no need to do, you know, both. You could if you wanted, because again, it doesn't take very long. But I just wanted to, you know, tie it all together. So once I had that stenciled on, I'm going to adhere the rest of my sentiments. So it says "For my sweet Valentine." So adhered the Valentine word first with the craft tacky glue, and then I'm going to adhere the rest of the sentiment right above that. Let's get that adhered, and then I can adhere my card front to the card base. And the card base, like I said, it's heavyweight white cardstock. It was cut to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored at 5 1/2. So it's a top folding A2 sized card. So I used the craft tacky glue on the back of my card front, and then that gave me the wiggle room to like make sure this was, you know, centered and adhered properly to the card before the glue starts to dry. And then once I had that in place, just as a final little bit of embellishment, I have a bunch of these little Be Mine candy hearts from Honeybee. They had released these I think like last year or something, but had them in my stash, and I've had them just sitting out during my little series here of making Valentine's cards. So these white ones I thought were kind of cute. So I kind of sprinkled them onto my card front and just adhered them into place with more dabs of the craft tacky glue, just picking it up with my jewel picker, putting down a little bit of adhesive, sticking that into place. And that's going to finish off my card. So as always, like I said in the beginning, there will be a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have a supply list with links to all the supplies used. There'll be links in the blog post to all the other designers of today's hop as well as yesterday's hop. So all that info will be in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!